The Korangal Valley stretched like a wound across the Afghan earth, its steep walls rising to meet a sky bleached white by a merciless sun. A convoy of dust-caked Humvees crawled along the valley floor, the silence of their approach broken only by the crackle of radio checks and the low rumble of engines straining against the incline. Bravo 6, this is Echo 2. Visual sweep clear, proceeding to checkpoint Alpha. Then came the sound that veterans hear in their nightmares. The hollow thump of an IED followed by the metallic screech of shrapnel tearing through armor. The lead Humvee disappeared in a cloud of dust and fire. Ambush! Ambush! Tracer rounds cut through the air like angry fireflies, their red streaks marking paths of certain death. Marines scrambled for cover, their boots kicking up dirt as they dove behind disabled vehicles and shallow depressions in the ground. Return fire erupted, but it was scattered, unfocused, a panicked response against an enemy that seemed to materialize from the ridgelines themselves. This is Miller. We're pinned down at grid 7-9-4, taking fire from all sides. Blood pooled beneath a young corporal slumped against a wheel well, his eyes wide with the shock that precedes death. 3 Marines dragged a wounded comrade behind a smoking engine block, bullets kicking up dust inches from their heels. Inside the command center of Firebase Liberty, 30 miles from the killing zone, a wall of monitors displayed the unfolding disaster in high-definition clarity. Drone footage captured Marines scattered like broken chess pieces across the valley floor. Heat signatures bloomed along the ridgelines, Taliban fighters entrenched in positions that commanded every approach and exit. Colonel James Harrison stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of tactical displays. At 52, he'd survived 3 wars, earned 2 Purple Hearts, and developed the 1,000-yard stare that came from writing too many letters to too many families. Now he watched another disaster unfold with the detached calculation of a man accustomed to weighing lives against regulations. 480 personnel confirmed in the valley, Major Ellis reported, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding on screen. Air support. Negative, Harrison replied. 2 F-15Es in the area, but the 200-meter proximity restriction is in effect. Rules of engagement are clear. Sir, they're being slaughtered. Harrison's jaw tightened. I'm aware, Major. He turned to a communications officer. Draft the casualty report template. We'll fill in names as confirmation comes in. The room fell silent, save for the chatter of radios and the clatter of keyboards. A dozen officers and analysts monitored screens, their faces masks of professional detachment hiding the helplessness beneath. From the shadows at the back of the room, a figure stepped forward. Sergeant Olivia Liv Reeves stood 5'4", her frame slight compared to the men around her. Where they projected authority through volume and stature, she carried herself with the quiet precision of a scalpel. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform pressed to perfection despite the Afghan heat. In her hands, she held an M40A5 sniper rifle with the familiarity of someone handling an extension of their own body. I can end this, she said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Every head in the room turned. Some faces registered surprise, others dismissal, a few outright contempt. Colonel Harrison didn't bother to look at her. Return to your station, Sergeant. This isn't a shooting gallery. Liv didn't move, her eyes fixed on the screens where her Marines fought and died in real time. Her fingers tightened imperceptibly around the rifle's stock. With respect, sir. That's an order, Sergeant Reeves. On the largest monitor, a young lieutenant crawled toward a fallen comrade, tracers cutting the air inches above his helmet. Blood darkened the sand beneath both men. Liv's gaze shifted from the screen to the colonel's back, her expression unreadable. Then she turned and disappeared back into the shadows of the command center, taking her rifle with her. The image on screen froze, then rewound. Text appeared across the frame, 72 hours earlier. Dawn at Firebase Liberty painted the mountains in shades of amber and gold, the beauty a stark contrast to the base's utilitarian ugliness, concrete barriers, razor wire, and prefabricated buildings arranged with military precision. Heat already shimmered above the landing strip, where a Chinook thundered to life, preparing for another mission into contested territory. Inside a small maintenance building converted to an armory, Sergeant Olivia Reeves sat cross-legged on a tarp spread across the floor. Before her lay the disassembled components of an M40A5 sniper rifle, the Marine Corps' standard-issue precision weapon. Each piece was meticulously arranged, the metal surfaces gleaming with the dull sheen of recent cleaning. Liv moved with practiced efficiency, her hands steady as she inspected the bolt face for carbon buildup. She ran an oiled cloth down the barrel's rifled interior, checking for imperfections invisible to the untrained eye. The scope, a Schmidt and Bender PM by 525 by 56 with Horus H58 reticle, received special attention, its glass surfaces cleaned with the delicacy reserved for religious artifacts. This wasn't standard maintenance. This was ritual. Next to her lay a small green notebook, its pages filled with neat handwriting, columns of numbers, calculations for various distances and wind conditions, and hand-drawn diagrams of bullet trajectories. Where the military taught standardized formulas, Liv had developed her own tailored to her shooting style and the specific characteristics of her rifle. Most people just use the charts, a gravelly voice observed from the doorway. Liv didn't startle. Few people could sneak up on her, and William Old Bill Carter wasn't among them. At 68, the retired Marine Master Sergeant moved with the telltale heaviness of aging joints and old wounds. His presence at Firebase Liberty was unusual. Officially, he served as a civilian consultant for marksmanship training. Unofficially, everyone knew he was there to evaluate combat readiness before the planned drawdown. Old Bill's ice blue eyes had faded with age, but lost none of their intensity. His silver hair was still cut high and tight, and a long scar ran from his left temple to his jawline, a souvenir from Desert Storm that he wore like a badge of honor. He leaned against the doorframe, the arms crossed over a chest that remained barrel-solid despite his years. "Charts are for people who accept average results," Liv replied, not looking up as she reassembled the rifle with fluid motions. "I don't." Bill's weathered face creased in a smile. "Your daddy taught you that." The mention of her father caused Liv's hands to pause for just a fraction of a second, a hesitation so brief anyone else would have missed it. But Old Bill noticed. He noticed everything. "He did," she acknowledged, sliding the bolt assembly back into place with a satisfying click. Jack Reeves had been one of the finest snipers in the Corps, with confirmed kills in both Gulf Wars that rewrote the standards for long-distance shooting. But to Liv, he'd simply been Dad, the man who taught her to shoot on their small Texas ranch, who emphasized patience and control above all else. "Never rush the shot," he'd tell her, as they lay side by side on a hill overlooking tin cans arranged at various distances. "The bullet doesn't care if you're excited or scared or angry. It follows physics, not feelings." By 10, she could outshoot most adults at the local range. By 16, she developed the almost supernatural stillness that separated good shooters from great ones, the ability to control not just her breathing, but her heartbeat to exist in perfect harmony with the Earth's rotation and the wind's subtle shifts. When Jack died a car accident on a rain-slicked highway when Liv was 18, he left her his old Winchester and the notebook he'd kept throughout his career. The last entry, written the day before his death, read simply, "The shot you don't take haunts you longer than the ones you do." She joined the Marines a week after his funeral. Old Bill crossed the room and lowered himself onto a wooden crate, his knees cracking in protest. "Your rifle's already cleaner than the day it was issued. What are you really doing in here, Reeves?" Liv secured the scope mount with practiced precision. "Preparing. For what you've been relegated to support details since you arrived." Her expression remained neutral, but something flashed in her eyes, a momentary glimpse of the fire she kept carefully banked. "Things change." Bill leaned forward, lowering his voice though they were alone. "I knew your father in Iraq, you know. Second Battle of Fallujah. He saved my platoon with shots that shouldn't have been possible." He paused, studying her face. "Jack would be proud of what you did there yourself 5 years back. Even if those pencil pushers at the Pentagon buried the records." Liv's head snapped up, her composure cracking for the first time. "You know about that?" The old sniper's laugh was dry as desert air. "Girl, I helped design the Phantom program. You think I wouldn't recognize one of our own?" He tapped his index finger against his wrist exactly where Liv's uniform sleeve covered a small tattoo. "Phantom 7, if I recall correctly." Liv instinctively tugged her sleeve lower, concealing the mark that identified her as part of an elite ghost unit, snipers who operated beyond conventional military structure, executing missions that officially never happened. Missions like the one in Fallujah that had saved 30 Delta Force operators but cost her career in combat operations. "That program doesn't exist," she said carefully. and I'm just a regular Marine sniper assigned to communications support. Sure you are, Bill nodded toward the notebook. That why you're calculating wind vectors for shots beyond 1,500 meters for your communications duties? She closed the notebook. Force of habit. Old Bill's eyes softened. They buried you in paperwork because they couldn't handle what you represent. A woman who can outshoot every swinging dick in this base threatens the natural order. He snorted. Politics over practicality. Tale as old as time. I follow orders, Liv said flatly. So did your father until he didn't. Bill stood with a grunt joints protesting. You know what Jack told me once? He said, sometimes saving lives requires breaking rules. Wise man, your daddy. He turned to leave but paused at the doorway. The battalion's moving into Korengal tomorrow. Up briefing at 1800. You might want to attend even if you're not on the roster. His eyes suddenly sharp as a hawk's locked with hers, just in case things change. After he left, Liv sat motionless, her hand resting on the rifle stock. Then she opened her notebook again, turning to a blank page. At the top, she wrote Korengal Valley, approach vectors and wind analysis. And she had preparations to make. The mess hall at Firebase Liberty resembled a high school cafeteria transplanted to a war zone, long metal tables, institutional lighting, and social hierarchies as rigid as the Marines' posture. The air hung heavy with the smell of powdered eggs, industrial-strength coffee, and the particular musk of too many bodies confined in too small a space. Liv moved through the chow line with practiced efficiency, keeping her eyes on her tray and her expression neutral. The server, a board contractor with sweat stains blooming under his arms, slopped reconstituted eggs next to something that might have been sausage in a previous life. She nodded her thanks and turned to find a seat. The mess hall wasn't full, but it might as well have been. As she walked past tables, conversations quieted, shoulders stiffened, and eyes slid away. Not from fear or respect, but from the particular discomfort Marines felt around those who didn't fit the mold, those whose presence represented an inconvenient challenge to the established order. Look alive, boys. Dead weight incoming. A voice called out just loud enough to be heard, but not quite loud enough to be considered insubordination. Sergeant Mike Donovan sat at a table surrounded by his usual entourage Marines who'd played college football, who measured worth in bench press numbers and combat deployments. At 35, Donovan carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who'd never doubted his place in the hierarchy. His broad shoulders strained against his uniform, and his face carried the weathered look of someone who'd seen enough combat to be dangerous but not enough to be humble. Hey, Reeves, he called as she passed. Heard you qualified on the range yesterday. What did they have you shoot at the broadside of a barn? Snickers rippled through his audience. Liv kept walking, her face a mask of indifference. She found an empty table in the corner and sat with her back to the wall, a habit born of both tactical awareness and social necessity. The quota sniper strikes again, Donovan stage whispered to his companions. Pentagon needs it as diversity numbers, even if it means putting a rifle in hands that can barely carry it. More laughter, louder now. Liv ate methodically, her movements economical, her eyes occasionally scanning the room with the automatic situational awareness of someone who had operated in hostile territory. Not the battlefields of Afghanistan, but the equally treacherous terrain of being a woman in a world designed by and for men who resented her presence. Across the mess hall, another set of eyes watched the exchange. Lieutenant Jason Miller, 26, and only 6 months into his commission, observed with a frown. Unlike the others, Miller had reviewed the service records of everyone under his command, including the mysterious Sergeant Reeves, whose file contained more redacted sections than actual information. Next to Miller sat Commander Mark Warren of SEAL Team 6, a stocky man with the quiet intensity of someone who preferred action to words. At 45, Warren had the reputation and the scars to command respect without demanding it. He'd arrived at Firebase Liberty 2 days earlier for joint operations planning, and his presence added an unusual tension to the base's atmosphere. Your Marines always this welcoming? Warren asked Miller, nodding toward Donovan's table. Miller shifted uncomfortably. Donovan's a good Marine, just old school. Old school, Warren repeated, his tone, making it clear what he thought of that assessment. His eyes returned to Liv sitting alone, and her Sergeant Reeves and Miller shrugged. Support detail, communications intelligence analysis. Keeps to herself. Warren's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. She's a qualified sniper. On paper, Miller replied. Colonel Harrison keeps her on base operations, says her skills are better utilized in support roles. Does he now? It wasn't a question. Warren stood gathering his tray. Instead of heading for the disposal area, he walked directly to Liv's table and set his tray down across from her. Mind if I join you, Sergeant? Liv looked up, surprised, briefly crossing her features before the professional mask returned. Of course not, sir. Warren sat his movements controlled and deliberate. Commander Mark Warren, SEAL Team 6. I know who you are, sir. The corner of Warren's mouth twitched. I expect you do. He took a bite of eggs chewed thoughtfully. Heard there's a range qualification this afternoon. You planning to attend? I've already qualified, sir. Not what I asked. Liv studied him for a moment, trying to read the intent behind the question. I generally practice daily, sir, when duties permit. Warren nodded. I'll see you there then. Across the mess hall, Donovan and his group watched the exchange with poorly concealed interest. The SEAL commander's deliberate association with the female sniper sent a clear message, one that would ripple through the base's social structure. 3 hours later, under the punishing afternoon sun, Liv lay prone on the firing line, her cheek welded to the stock of her rifle. The range stretched before her paper targets, set at intervals from 300 to 1,000 meters. Heat waves distorted the air, creating the mirage effect that amateur shooters often fail to account for. She controlled her breathing 4 seconds in hold for 4 seconds out. Her heart rate slowed to a steady 55 beats per minute. The crosshairs of her scope settled on the most distant target, wavering slightly with each heartbeat. Around her, other Marines completed their qualifications, their shots coming in irregular intervals. Most hit the closer targets consistently, but struggled with the 800-meter mark. Liv waited, timing her shot between heartbeats between breaths. She squeezed the trigger, a smooth, continuous pressure rather than a pull. The rifle barked, the recoil flowing through her body like a wave. Before the sound had faded, she was already cycling the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, chambering another round. 10 shots, 10 bullseyes, all at 1,000 meters. When she stood and stepped away from the firing line, she found old Bill watching from the shade of a nearby canopy. Next to him stood Commander Warren, his arms crossed over his chest. Impressive shooting, Sergeant, Warren said as she approached. Thank you, sir. I've seen better, old Bill chimed in, his voice gruff. Your third shot pulled right by 2 centimeters. Liv's expression didn't change, but her eyes met Bill's with understanding. In front of others, especially officers, he would never show her preferential treatment or excessive praise. That wasn't how the game was played. Win, Gus, sir. I'll adjust next time. See that you do. Bill turned to Warren. She's got potential, needs experience. Warren's eyes narrowed slightly. Does she, the silent exchange between the two men, contain volumes, professional respect, shared knowledge, and the weight of secrets that couldn't be spoken aloud? Liv stood at parade rest, aware that decisions about her future were being negotiated in glances and subtle nods. Later that evening, as darkness settled over the base and most Marines retreated to barracks or recreation areas, Liv found herself summoned to old Bill's makeshift office, a converted storage room filled with ballistics charts and vintage firearms that he'd somehow smuggled into a war zone. Close the door, he instructed when she entered. She complied, then stood at attention. You wanted to see me, Master Sergeant? Cut the formality, Reeves, we're alone. Bill sat behind a desk cluttered with papers and spent shell casings that he used as paperweights. Commander Warren asked about you. Liv remained expressionless. What did he want to know? If you were the same Reeves who operated in Fallujah 5 years ago, the one they call Phantom 7. Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. What did you tell him? Nothing he doesn't already know. Bill leaned forward. Warren was there, Liv. He was commanding the Delta unit you saved with those 3 impossible shots. He recognized your shooting style at the range today. Liv's careful composure slipped. That's impossible. The operation was classified. My involvement was scrubbed from all records. Official records, sure. Bill tapped his temple. But men like Warren don't forget the person who saves their lives from 1,500 meters out. He studied her for a moment. There's something bigger happening here. You being assigned to this base, Warren showing up for a joint op the mission into Korengal tomorrow, none of it's coincidence. What are you saying? Bill stood and moved to a small safe in the corner. He dialed the combination and removed a folder with no markings. The Phantom program wasn't disbanded after Fallujah, it was restructured. He placed the folder on the desk. They're reactivating assets, starting with you. Liv stared at the folder but didn't reach for it. I'm not an asset. I'm a Marine assigned to support detail because the brass can't handle a female sniper getting credit for high-value eliminations. That's the official story, Bill agreed. The truth is more complicated. He pushed the folder toward her. The Korengal mission isn't a standard sweep operation. It's bait. Bait for what? Not what, who. Bill's expression darkened. Intelligence suggests a former Russian Spetsnaz operator is training Taliban fighters in advanced ambush tactics. The same one who nearly wiped out Warren's team in Fallujah before you intervened. They're using this mission to draw him out. Liv finally took the folder, opening it to find satellite imagery of the Korengal Valley with annotations highlighting potential sniper positions and ambush points. Does Colonel Harrison know about this? Harrison knows what he needs to know. To him, this is a standard operation with standard protocols. Bill's eyes hardened, which is why you've been deliberately excluded from the mission roster. That makes no sense. If they're reactivating me, think Liv. What happens when 480 Marines roll into that valley and meet a force trained by one of Russia's best snipers? Understanding dawned on her face. They're expecting casualties. They're counting on them, Bill corrected grimly. Nothing motivates a reactivation like Marines in body bags. Nothing justifies bending rules like a massacre in progress. Liv closed the folder, her mind racing. Why tell me this? Old Bill's weathered face softened slightly. Because your father was my friend. Because you deserve to know when you are being used as a pawn. He paused. And because 480 young men and women shouldn't die as political chess pieces. What am I supposed to do with this information? That's up to you, Sergeant. Bill turned away, signaling the end of the conversation. Briefings at 1800. I'd recommend attending. Knowledge is only power if you have it before you need it. As Liv left the office, the weight of the folder in her hands felt heavier than any rifle she'd ever carried. The game was larger and more complex than she'd imagined, with pieces moving on a board she couldn't fully see. But one thing was clear. 80 Marines were being marched into a trap, and she was expected to watch it happen. Unless she decided to change the rules. The briefing room hummed with the controlled chaos of pre-mission preparations. Maps covered the walls, and a three-dimensional terrain model of the Korengal Valley dominated the central table. Officers clustered in small groups reviewing intelligence reports and contingency plans with the focused intensity of men preparing to lead others into harm's way. Colonel Harrison stood at the head of the room, his posture ramrod straight, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a career officer. Intelligence indicates minimal enemy presence in the eastern corridor, he explained using a laser pointer to trace the planned route. 2 platoons will establish a blocking position at the northern entrance while the main force sweeps from south to north, clearing any resistance. Liv sat in the back row, absorbing every detail. The official briefing matched what Old Bill had shared, but with critical omissions. No mention of the Spetsnaz operator. No acknowledgement of the perfect ambush conditions created by the valley's geography. The mission was presented as a routine sweep operation with expected light resistance. She studied the terrain model, noting how the steep walls created natural choke points. The narrow entrance where the convoy would enter. The limited approach vectors that channeled movement into predictable lanes. The elevated positions that provided perfect firing solutions down into the valley floor. It wasn't just a potential ambush site, it was a killing box designed by someone who understood both terrain and human psychology, someone trained to exploit predictable tactical responses. When Harrison opened the floor for questions, Liv raised her hand. The colonel's eyes swept past her as if she weren't there. She raised it higher. "Colonel," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation, "I have concerns about the terrain analysis." The room quieted. Every head turned in her direction. Harrison's expression tightened almost imperceptibly before he nodded. "Go ahead, Sergeant." Liv stood and approached the terrain model. The valley configuration presents optimal conditions for a prepared ambush. These ridgelines provide interlocking fields of fire covering all approach and exit routes. Her finger traced the contours of the surrounding hills. If enemy forces have occupied these positions with crew-served weapons, our convoy would be caught in a crossfire with limited cover and no viable extraction route. A few officers exchanged glances. Lieutenant Miller leaned forward, studying the model with newfound concern. Commander Warren, standing in the back corner, watched with undisguised interest. Harrison's voice remained level, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. Your concern is noted, Sergeant. However, intelligence confirms minimal enemy presence. Intelligence can be manipulated, sir. The terrain cannot. Liv pointed to specific features. These draws provide perfect concealment for RPG teams. These elevated positions would allow machine gun emplacements to cover the entire valley floor. The restricted width prevents vehicles from turning around once engaged. Sergeant Donovan, seated in the front row, turned to face her. Since when do comms specialists give tactical assessments? Reeves stick to radios. Several Marines chuckled, but the laughter died quickly when Warren spoke from the back. I've seen similar terrain used to devastating effect in previous operations. The SEAL commander's voice carried the weight of hard-won experience. Sergeant Reeves' assessment merits consideration. Harrison's expression hardened. The operational plan stands. We have air support on standby and artillery coverage from Firebase Romeo. He looked directly at Liv for the first time. Sergeant, while your enthusiasm is noted, tactical assessment is outside your purview. Return to your station. Sir. That's an order, Sergeant. Liv held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly respectful, then nodded sharply. Yes, sir. As she returned to her seat, she caught Old Bill's eye. The veteran sniper gave an almost imperceptible nod, confirmation that she'd done what she could within the constraints of military protocol. Now the decision was hers. The briefing continued, but Liv heard little of it. Her mind was already calculating angles, distances, wind patterns, the thousand variables that separated successful shots from missed opportunities. In her head, she was no longer in the briefing room, but on a ridgeline overlooking the valley, watching through her scope as the scenario unfolded. After the briefing, as Marines filtered out to prepare equipment and write last letters home, a tradition many observed before operations, regardless of the assessed threat level, Liv found herself cornered by Donovan and two of his cronies. Trying to get yourself included in a combat op, Reeves, Donovan's voice dripped with contempt. Nobody wants a liability out there. Liv met his gaze evenly. If noting potential tactical vulnerabilities makes me a liability, I'll accept the label. Playing soldier doesn't make you one. Donovan stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. You qualified on a range. Congratulations. Combat isn't paper targets and perfect conditions. It's blood and fear and split-second decisions that get people killed if you hesitate. I don't hesitate, Sergeant. You wouldn't know until you were there. He tapped her chest with his index finger. And you won't be there tomorrow. Thank God for small mercies. As he and his friends walked away laughing, Lieutenant Miller approached. Unlike Donovan, the young officer's expression held genuine curiosity rather than dismissal. That was a solid terrain assessment, Sergeant, he said quietly. I've added some additional security measures based on your observations. Thank you, sir, but it's not enough. Liv glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. The valley is a natural ambush point. Even with additional security, a well-coordinated attack could inflict severe casualties before effective countermeasures could be deployed. Miller frowned. You seem very certain. I am, sir. That terrain speaks to anyone who knows how to listen. The lieutenant studied her face. I'll keep your concerns in mind, Sergeant. He hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I requested you for the operation, as a spotter at minimum. Colonel Harrison denied it personally. Liv wasn't surprised, but the confirmation stung nonetheless. Be careful tomorrow, Lieutenant. Watch the eastern ridge. That's where I'd put my best shooters if I were setting the ambush. Miller nodded, his youthful face suddenly grave with the responsibility of leading men into potential danger. I will. Thank you, Sergeant. After he left, Liv returned to her quarters, a small private room that was one of the few perks of her unusual status on the base. Neither fully integrated into combat operations, nor relegated to pure administrative duties, she existed in a liminal space that granted her certain privileges while denying her others. She spread maps across her bed, comparing them with the satellite imagery Old Bill had provided. Using a protractor and pencil, she marked firing positions, calculated distances, and noted potential wind channels created by the valley's configuration. In her notebook, she recorded precise coordinates, elevation adjustments, and estimated bullet drop for various ranges. It was well past midnight when she finally set her work aside. Tomorrow, 480 Marines would enter the Korengal Valley, following a plan that ignored obvious dangers and discounted clear warning signs. They would be led by officers who trusted intelligence reports over physical evidence and protocol over instinct. And she would be left behind to watch from a distance because a woman who could outshoot every man on the base threatened the established order. Because acknowledging her skills meant acknowledging that the barriers placed before her were arbitrary rather than necessary. Because it was easier to risk lives than to challenge conventions. Liv lay back on her bunk staring at the ceiling. She thought of her father's last written words, "The shot you don't take haunts you longer than the ones you do." Tomorrow Marines would die in a valley that might as well have been designed for their slaughter. The question wasn't whether she could save them, she knew she could. The question was whether she would accept the consequences of defying direct orders to do so. As dawn broke over the mountains, Liv had her answer. She began preparing her rifle, her movements deliberate and precise. Whatever came next, she would face it without hesitation or regret. The shot not taken was the one that haunted, and Olivia Reeves had no intention of living with those particular ghosts. The convoy rolled out at dawn, a column of dust-caked vehicles stretching like vertebrae along the spine of the mountain road. Humvees and MRAPs moved in tight formation, gunners scanning the ridgelines through mounted optics, their faces set in the frozen concentration of men entering hostile territory. Lieutenant Jason Miller rode in the lead vehicle, his helmet low over his eyes, one hand gripping the radio handset, while the other rested near his sidearm. At 26, this was his first major command, 480 Marines under his tactical direction. The responsibility sat heavy on shoulders that suddenly felt too young, too unprepared. "Maintain spacing," he ordered over the tactical net. "Eyes high on those eastern ridges." The warning from Sergeant Reeves had lodged in his mind like a splinter. Despite the official intelligence assessment, Miller had quietly repositioned his best marksmen to cover the eastern approaches and instructed vehicle commanders to prepare fallback positions. Small adjustments that wouldn't contradict the operational plan, but might save lives if the female sniper's concerns proved justified. 5 minutes to valley entrance, his driver announced, downshifting as the road narrowed. Miller keyed his radio again. "All units approaching phase line Alpha. Weapons tight, stay alert." The Korengal Valley opened before them like the maw of some ancient beast. Steep walls rose on either side, their faces scarred with narrow goat paths and scattered vegetation. The valley floor, no more than 200 meters wide at its broadest point, offered minimal cover. A few scattered boulders, shallow depressions, and the dry stream bed that curved along its center. "Beautiful country," Miller's gunner remarked, sweeping his weapon across the ridge lines. "Shame about the neighborhood." Miller didn't respond, his attention fixed on the terrain. Everything about it whispered danger. The natural choke points, the commanding heights, the limited maneuver space. Sergeant Reeves had been right, this was perfect ambush territory. Back at Firebase Liberty, the command center hummed with controlled tension. Multiple screens displayed drone feeds, GPS tracking of the convoy, and communications monitoring. Colonel Harrison stood at the central console, his face illuminated by the blue glow of tactical displays. "Convoy approaching phase line Alpha," a communications officer reported. "All elements report conditions normal." Harrison nodded, his expression neutral. "Maintain surveillance focus on the northern exit point. That's where we expect any resistance." In the shadowed periphery of the room, Sergeant Olivia Reeves monitored a secondary display. Unlike the officers focused on the convoy's position, her attention was fixed on the ridgelines above. Her trained eyes scanned for the telltale signs others might miss. Disturbed vegetation, shadow movements, the glint of metal where none should be. She spotted the first anomaly almost immediately, a thin wisp of what might have been cigarette smoke rising from a rocky outcropping 600 meters above the valley entrance. Then a second, the slight movement of a tarp-like material that didn't match the natural coloration of the surroundings. Then a third, a momentary flash of reflection from what could only be a scope or binoculars. "Sir," she said, turning to the colonel, "I'm detecting multiple signatures on the eastern ridge. Possible observation posts." Harrison didn't look away from the main display. "Noted, Sergeant." "Sir, these match classic pre-ambush positioning. I recommend immediate warning to the convoy commander." Sergeant Donovan manning the communication station snorted. Seeing Ghost Reeves' drone shows clear. Drones aren't looking for what I'm seeing, Liv insisted, her voice level despite the urgency building in her chest. There are at least 3 observation positions with line of sight to the convoy route. Harrison finally turned his expression cold. Sergeant, return to your assigned monitoring station. We have trained imagery analysts for threat assessment. With respect, sir. That's an order, Sergeant. Liv fell silent, returning to her station with the rigid control of someone containing a volcano. Her eyes flicked between the screen and the colonel, measuring the distance to the radio console, calculating how quickly she could transmit a warning if necessary. In the valley, the convoy continued its advance, now fully committed to the narrow passage. Miller scanned the ridgelines, the prickling sensation on the back of his neck intensifying with each meter they progressed. The valley had fallen unnaturally silent. No birds, no insect sounds, nothing but the rumble of engines and the creak of equipment. I don't like this, his gunner muttered. Too quiet. Miller keyed his radio. All units increase interval to 50 meters. Something's off. As the vehicles began to spread out, providing less concentrated targets, Miller's eyes caught a subtle movement on the eastern ridge, a dark shape shifting against the rocks. He raised his binoculars for a closer look. In the split second before everything changed, he saw it clearly, the distinctive tube of an RPG launcher being raised to a shoulder. Contact right RPG, take convoy. The world exploded. The lead vehicle disappeared in a blossoming fireball, its front end lifted 3 feet off the ground by the force of the blast. Almost simultaneously, a daisy chain of IEDs detonated along the valley floor, bracketing the convoy in fire and shrapnel. The carefully orchestrated thunder of explosions echoed off the valley walls, multiplying the sound into a physical force that hammered eardrums and disoriented even veteran Marines. Before the smoke cleared, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions on both ridgelines. Tracer rounds crisscrossed the valley in glowing webs of death, finding targets with unerring precision. Marines scrambled for what little cover existed, returning fire at enemies they could barely see. Ambush, ambush. The cry echoed across the tactical net, followed by the controlled chaos of unit commanders organizing defensive positions and casualty reports. Miller found himself pinned behind the smoking engine block of his destroyed Humvee, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. His driver lay motionless beside him, half his face missing. The gunner screamed, somewhere behind him, high-pitched and inhuman, the sound of a man discovering parts of himself no longer attached. This is Miller. We're pinned at grid 7904, taking heavy fire from both ridgelines. Multiple casualties. In the command center, all pretense of routine operations vanished. The screens displayed the unfolding catastrophe in high-definition clarity, vehicles burning, Marines scattered and pinned down, muzzle flashes dotting the ridgelines like malevolent stars. F-15s are 20 minutes out, Major Ellis reported, his voice tight. Artillery support is being calculated, but we risk friendly fire with the current dispersion pattern. Colonel Harrison's face had gone gray. Get me options, people. Now. Liv stood frozen at her monitoring station, watching the slaughter unfold exactly as she had predicted. Her eyes mapped the enemy positions, identifying the primary firing points, calculating angles and distances with the automatic precision of a computer. In her mind, she was already on the ridge, rifle in hand, eliminating threats one by one. Sir, she said, approaching the colonel, I can provide precision fire support from the northern overlook. With a clear line of sight to the eastern ridge, I can suppress the heaviest concentration of enemy fire. Harrison didn't look at her. Negative, Sergeant. The 200-meter proximity restriction is in effect. No personnel enter the engagement zone. Marines are dying, sir. I'm aware, Sergeant. His voice was ice. Return to your station. Donovan looked up from his console, his earlier swagger replaced by genuine fear as reports of casualties flooded in. Echo 3 reports 6 KIA, 14 wounded. They can't reach the casualties under current fire. More reports cascaded in, each worse than the last. A machine gun position on the eastern ridge had pinned down an entire platoon. RPG teams were methodically destroying what remained of the vehicles. Snipers eliminated anyone who attempted to organize a coordinated response. On the main screen, the drone feed captured a Marine dragging a wounded comrade toward a shallow depression. 3 rounds kicked up dirt around them before the 4th found its mark, dropping both men in sprays of red mist. "This isn't a standard Taliban ambush," Commander Warren observed, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The firing discipline, the positioning, the coordination, this is professional military training." Old Bill Carter, who had entered the command center silently during the commotion, moved to stand beside Warren. "Russian doctrine," he said quietly. "I've seen it before." Liv's head snapped towards them, the confirmation of what she already suspected, sending ice through her veins. If a former Spetsnaz operator was coordinating this ambush, the Marines below had even less chance than she'd initially calculated. The radio crackled with Lieutenant Miller's voice, now ragged with pain and desperation. "Command, we are combat ineffective. I count at least 40 dead, unknown wounded. We need immediate air support or we're all going to die here." Colonel Harrison turned to the communications officer. "Tell them to hold position. Air support is inbound." "In 20 minutes, Liv said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They'll be overrun in 5. Harrison spun to face her, his professional mask cracking. "Sergeant, if you cannot maintain proper discipline, you will be removed from this room." Liv met his gaze without flinching. "I can end this," she repeated, her voice steady and certain. "Let me take the shot. The 200-meter rule exists for a reason, Sergeant. No exceptions." Another screen showed a Taliban fighter executing a wounded Marine at point-blank range. No one in the command center spoke. The only sound was the continuous stream of desperate radio calls from Marines watching their brothers die while help remained frustratingly out of reach. Liv looked from Harrison to Old Bill, whose weathered face revealed nothing but whose eyes spoke volumes. Then to Commander Warren, who studied her with the calculating gaze of a man measuring options against outcomes. She made her decision. Without another word, Liv turned and walked toward the exit, her stride purposeful and unhurried. No one moved to stop her. Perhaps they didn't notice her departure amid the chaos. Perhaps they chose not to see. Outside the command center, she broke into a run. The armory was quiet when Liv entered, the weapons chief having been called to the command center during the crisis. She moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving her M40A5 from its rack and collecting the additional equipment she would need: a suppressor, match-grade ammunition, a rangefinder, and her small green notebook containing ballistic calculations specific to the Korengal Valley. She worked methodically, checking each component with the focused intensity of someone performing a ritual. The scope mount was secured to exact specifications. The bipod legs were adjusted and locked. The suppressor was carefully threaded to prevent misalignment. Each 300 Winchester Magnum round was inspected for imperfections before being loaded into the magazine. As she prepared, a shadow fell across the doorway. She didn't need to look up to know who stood there. "You're about to disobey a direct order." "Old Bill," he said, his voice neutral. "Yes, sir." "Harrison will court-martial you for this." "If I'm still alive afterward, yes, sir." Bill stepped into the armory, closing the door behind him. "You'll need a spotter." Liv looked up surprised. "You're volunteering?" "Hell no." The old sniper snorted. "These knees haven't climbed a mountain in 15 years. But I can get you past the perimeter guards without questions." He moved to a storage locker and retrieved a handheld weather meter. "Valley winds shift counterclockwise in the afternoons. Temperature gradient will create a mirage layer about 2 feet above the valley floor. Account for it." Liv nodded, tucking the meter into her vest. "I know the shooter, or at least his training. The Russian, former Spetsnaz, likely deployed as a private contractor." She secured the rifle case and stood. "He'll have established a command position with overlapping fields of fire. Take him out first, and the rest of the ambush falls apart." Bill's eyes narrowed. "You sound certain." "Because it's what I would do." Liv checked her sidearm, a standard-issue M9 Beretta. "And we were trained by the same people." Understanding dawned on the old sniper's face. "The Joint Training Program at Fort Benning, 2008. Liv nodded. "Master Sergeant Volkov, best instructor I ever had." Her expression hardened. "Now he's killing Marines for money." "You sure it's him?" "The ambush setup is his signature. Multiple interlocking fields of fire, prioritizing crew-served weapons at the choke points, counter sniper positions pre-established." She secured her gear. "He taught us this exact scenario as the perfect ambush." Bill considered this, then moved to the window to check the perimeter. "Northern approach will be your best bet. There's a ridge that provides line of sight to both sides of the valley. Marines call it Hell's Ridge. Not on any official maps. I know it. Calculated firing solutions last night. A ghost of a smile crossed the old sniper's face. Of course you did. He turned back to her. What's your plan once you're in position? Priority targets first. Machine gun nests, then RPG teams, then command elements. Liv secured her helmet. Create a corridor for evacuation. And Volkov, her eyes hardened. If I see him, he dies first. Bill nodded, then reached into his pocket and removed a tarnished challenge coin, a Marine Corps sniper emblem worn smooth by years of handling. Jack gave me this after Fallujah. Said it brought him luck. He pressed it into her palm. Figure you could use some luck today. Liv closed her fingers around the coin, a rare show of emotion crossing her features. Thank you. Don't thank me. Bill's voice roughened. Just come back alive. I'm too old to break in another student. Together, they moved through the base, Bill's presence providing the authorization needed to bypass security checkpoints. At the northern perimeter, he engaged the guards in conversation about an equipment inspection, creating the distraction Liv needed to slip past the wire. Before she disappeared into the rocky terrain, Bill caught her arm. Liv. His use of her first name, a break from military protocol, underscored the gravity of the moment. The shots that matter most are the ones nobody sees coming. Remember that. She nodded once, then vanished into the landscape, becoming just another shadow among many. The climb to Hell's Ridge was punishing. The terrain rose at a steep incline, loose shale shifting treacherously underfoot. The Afghan sun hammered down with brutal intensity, baking the rocks until they radiated heat like furnace bricks. Liv moved steadily upward, controlling her breathing, conserving energy, her rifle case secured diagonally across her back. Each pause to rest became an opportunity to survey the battlefield below. The sounds of combat echoed up from the valley, the distinctive chatter of M4 carbines, the heavier thump of Taliban PKM machine guns, the hollow crump of RPG launches. Radio discipline had broken down with fragmented transmissions cutting across each other in a cacophony of desperation. Pinned on at the southern. Need immediate medevac. Out of ammunition. Requesting, oh God, they're flanking us from... Liv blocked out the voices, focusing only on her objective. Emotional detachment was essential for what came next. Marines were dying below, but allowing that knowledge to affect her judgment would only result in more deaths. After 40 minutes of grueling ascent, she reached the ridge. The position was perfect, a natural depression in the rock that offered both cover and a commanding view of the valley. She set up methodically, arranging her equipment with practiced precision. First came the rifle assembled and secured on its bipod, then the rangefinder set to her right for easy access. Her notebook, open to the relevant ballistic tables, was positioned under a small rock to prevent the wind from disturbing it. Finally, she arranged herself in a stable shooting position, her body forming a straight line behind the rifle to absorb recoil evenly. Through her scope, the valley transformed from chaotic battlefield to ordered geometry. She could see individual Marines pinned behind inadequate cover, the muzzle flashes of enemy positions, the systematic movement of Taliban fighters as they tightened the noose around the beleaguered convoy. She began her assessment, identifying and prioritizing targets with cold efficiency. The eastern ridge held 3 primary machine gun nests that commanded the valley floor. The western ridge contained the RPG teams that had destroyed the lead vehicles and were now targeting the few remaining operational Humvees. Between them, these positions had created a killing zone from which there was no escape. Lieutenant Miller had established a defensive position behind a cluster of destroyed vehicles, gathering the wounded in a depression that offered minimal protection. Even from this distance, Liv could see he was injured, one arm hanging limp at his side as he directed his remaining Marines. Donovan surprisingly had taken command of a smaller group to the north, organizing a disciplined defense despite being wounded himself. Blood darkened the side of his uniform, but he continued to direct fire and attend to the wounded around him. Liv's attention shifted to the enemy positions. As suspected, they displayed a level of tactical sophistication rarely seen among Taliban fighters. The machine guns were perfectly placed for interlocking fields of fire. The RPG teams repositioned after each shot to avoid counterfire. Snipers operated in coordinated pairs rather than as individuals. And then she saw him, a figure positioned on a rocky outcrop halfway up the eastern ridge. Unlike the black-clad Taliban fighters, this man wore desert camouflage and moved with the distinctive economy of a professional soldier. He carried no visible weapon but directed those around him with hand signals that Liv recognized immediately. Master Sergeant Volkov, former Spetsnaz operator, current mercenary, the architect of the ambush, killing her fellow Marines. She adjusted her position, centering her crosshairs on his chest. Range 200 meters, a challenging shot under ideal conditions, nearly impossible given the current variables, shifting wind's heat, mirage the target's partial concealment behind rocks. For a moment, memory overlaid reality. Volkov standing behind her at Fort Benning, correcting her shooting posture with firm hands. His accented voice explaining the mathematics of long-distance shooting. The grudging respect in his eyes when she outshot every other student in the class. The best shot, he had told her, is the one your enemy never expects. Liv exhaled slowly, emptying her lungs completely. Her heartbeat slowed, each pulse distinct and measurable. The crosshairs settled, wavered slightly with her heartbeat, then stabilized as she timed her shot between beats. Her finger took up the slack in the trigger, a smooth, continuous pressure, rather than a pull. 1 pound of pressure. 2, 3. At the precise moment of perfect alignment, the rifle cracked its report, muffled by the suppressor, but still audible in the thin mountain air. The recoil flowed through her body like a wave absorbed and channeled. Through the scope, she watched Volkov jerk backward, a spray of red mist erupting from his chest. He collapsed behind the rocks, visible only as a set of boots protruding at an unnatural angle. Before the echo of the shot had faded, Liv was already cycling, the bolt ejecting the spent casing and chambering another round. No time for confirmation or satisfaction. One target down, many more to follow. She shifted her aim to the nearest machine gun position, where 2 Taliban fighters maintained a steady stream of fire into a group of pinned Marines. The range was shorter, approximately 900 meters, but the wind had shifted, requiring a quick recalculation. 2 shots, 2 bodies slumping over their weapon. Next came an RPG team preparing to fire on Miller's position. 1 shot for the gunner, another for his assistant. The rocket launcher clattered to the ground unfired. Below in the valley, confusion spread through the Taliban ranks as their carefully coordinated ambush began to unravel. Fighters looked up, trying to identify the source of the unseen death striking their positions. Commands were shouted in Pashto, contradicting each other as uncertainty replaced confidence. In the command center at Firebase Liberty, the sudden shift in battlefield dynamics registered on multiple monitors. Enemy positions that had maintained continuous fire for 30 minutes suddenly fell silent. Taliban fighters who had been advancing confidently began to scatter, seeking cover from an invisible threat. "What the hell is happening?" Colonel Harrison demanded, watching the screens with growing confusion. Old Bill, who had returned to the command center after seeing Liv off, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. That colonel is what happens when you put the right Marine in the right position. Realization dawned on Harrison's face. "Reeves," he breathed, anger and disbelief warring in his expression. "She disobeyed direct orders." "Yes, sir," Bill agreed calmly. "And she's currently saving the lives of 480 Marines who would otherwise be coming home in body bags." On the tactical radio, a new energy entered the transmissions from the valley. What had been desperate pleas for support transformed into organized response as the overwhelming enemy fire suddenly diminished. "This is Miller, enemy machine gun nest on Eastern Ridge eliminated, establishing casualty collection point at grid 801. Another voice cut across the net. Donovan strained but determined. "Something's taking out the tangos on the high ground. Unknown friendly sniper providing overwatch." Commander Warren, who had been silently monitoring the situation, stepped forward. "That firing pattern." His voice trailed off as he studied the drone feed showing enemy positions being systematically eliminated. "I've seen it before." "Where?" Harrison demanded. Warren's eyes met Old Bill's across the room. "Fallujah, 5 years ago." He turned to the radio operator. "Patch me through to the battalion net. Now." When handed the microphone, Warren's voice took on a formal quality rarely heard outside of official ceremonies. "All units, this is Commander Warren. Be advised, Phantom 7 is on overwatch. Repeat, Phantom 7 has the high ground." A stunned silence fell across the radio net, followed by a cascade of responses. "Did he say Phantom 7? That's just a rumor." "Holy shit, is it really? I thought that was classified." Even Colonel Harrison seemed shaken. "Phantom 7. That program was deactivated years ago." "The program, yes," Warren agreed. "The operators still exist." On the ridge above the valley, Liv continued her methodical work. Each shot was calculated, executed, and immediately followed by repositioning to avoid counter-sniper fire. She moved like a ghost along the ridgeline, appearing at one position long enough for a single shot, then vanishing before enemy spotters could fix her location. The rhythm of combat became a dance she knew. Intimately observe, calculate, breathe, squeeze, move. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The rifle an extension of her will, translating thought into kinetic force delivered with surgical precision across impossible distances. When a Taliban spotter finally located her position and directed fire in her direction, she was already gone, reappearing 50 meters away to eliminate him with a shot that defied the mathematics of probability, a 100-meter kill through gusting winds and heat mirage. Below, Miller had reorganized his surviving Marines into a defensive perimeter, now able to return effective fire as the overwhelming enemy superiority disappeared, one precision shot at a time. Donovan led a team to recover wounded from exposed positions, the suppressing fire from above creating corridors of relative safety through the battlefield. Then came the radio call that changed everything. All units, this is actual. Blackhawks inbound, ETA 15 minutes. Mark LZs with smoke when ready. Evacuation was coming, but 15 minutes remained an eternity on a battlefield where life expectancy was measured in seconds. The surviving Marines would need continuous covering fire until the helicopters arrived. Liv settled into her final position, a narrow crevice that offered both concealment and a commanding field of fire. From here, she could control the approaches to the designated landing zones, creating a protective umbrella beneath which the evacuation could proceed. As she scanned for targets, movement on the western ridge caught her attention. A Taliban fighter had positioned himself on a rocky outcrop with a clear line of sight to the primary landing zone. In his hands was not an AK-47, but the distinctive tube of a Dragunov SVD, the standard sniper rifle of Russian-trained forces. The counter-sniper had finally arrived. Liv calculated the shot when 300 meters with a crosswind gusting to 15 knots. Beyond the effective range of her rifle under these conditions, beyond what most would consider possible. Yet she had made such shots before. She adjusted her position mentally, recalculating the ballistics. The bullet would drop approximately 25 feet over that distance. The wind would push it nearly 6 feet to the left. The Earth's rotation would add a slight rightward drift at the extreme range. As she prepared to take the shot, a glint of light from a different position caught her attention, the reflection of sunlight on a scope lens. A second sniper, this one positioned to create a crossfire with the first. They were hunting her now, professionals recognizing a superior threat and coordinating to eliminate it. Liv had seconds to decide, engage the first sniper and expose herself to the second, or reposition and risk losing them both in the process. The decision was made for her when a round cracked past her head, close enough that she felt the displacement of air against her cheek. The second sniper had spotted her. Moving with controlled urgency, she rolled sideways into a shallow depression, keeping her rifle tight against her body. Another round struck where she had been lying, sending rock fragments stinging across her exposed skin. For the first time since beginning her mission, Liv found herself on the defensive, pinned by accurate fire from an opponent with similar training and equipment. The rules of engagement had shifted from hunter to hunted. She took a deep breath, forcing her heart rate to slow despite the surge of adrenaline. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Time was running out for the Marines below. The evacuation helicopters were inbound. She needed to regain control of the high ground. Removing her helmet, she placed it carefully on the end of her cleaning rod and slowly raised it above the rocky depression. A shot rang out immediately, punching through the Kevlar with precision that confirmed her suspicions. These were not ordinary Taliban fighters, but trained professionals. The muzzle flash provided what she needed, the exact position of the second sniper. In one fluid motion, she pivoted around the rock face, brought her rifle to bear, and fired. Through the scope, she saw the sniper jerk backward, then lie still. One down, one remaining. Repositioning again, she focused on the original sniper on the western ridge. He would have seen his partner fall and would be expecting her to engage. This would be a battle of patience. The first to move would likely be the one to die. Minutes stretched into an eternity as Liv remained perfectly still, controlling her breathing to prevent the rise and fall of her chest from giving away her position. The sun beat down mercilessly, sweat running into her eyes and salt crystallizing on her skin as it dried. Still, she didn't move. In the valley below, the first evacuation, helicopters appeared on the horizon, their distinctive silhouettes growing larger against the azure sky. Miller's Marines popped colored smoke to mark the landing zone, the green cloud billowing and swirling in the hot valley air. The moment had come. The enemy sniper would have to take his shot at the helicopters or lose his opportunity. Liv tensed her crosshairs fixed on the position where she knew he waited. When he finally moved, it was with the confidence of someone who believed his opponent neutralized. He rose slightly, adjusting his position to engage the approaching helicopters. In that moment of exposure, Liv took her shot. At 300 meters with gusting winds in a partially obscured target, it was as much art as science. A shot that defied mathematical probability, relying instead on intuition, honed through thousands of hours behind a rifle. The bullet traveled for nearly 2 full seconds, a lifetime in which a million variables could alter its path. Through her scope, Liv saw the enemy sniper suddenly pitch sideways, his rifle tumbling from lifeless hands. Below, the first Black Hawk descended into the green smoke, its rotors whipping the marker into a frenzied spiral. Marines moved toward it in disciplined groups, carrying their wounded, covering each other's approach with disciplined fire. Lieutenant Miller directed the evacuation from a kneeling position, one arm hanging useless at his side, but his voice still strong over the tactical net. "First chalk away, wounded only. Second bird stand by." Liv continued her overwatch, eliminating any threat that emerged to challenge the evacuation. Her ammunition had dwindled to a handful of rounds, each one now reserved for only the most critical targets. The rifle barrel had heated from repeated firing, creating additional variables she compensated for instinctively. As the third helicopter lifted away with its precious cargo of wounded Marines, Liv spotted movement in her peripheral vision, a group of Taliban fighters working their way up the ridge toward her position. They had finally identified the source of their troubles and committed a squad to eliminate her. She counted 8 fighters moving with the cautious precision of experienced combatants. Her remaining ammunition 5 rounds. The math was simple and unforgiving. Gathering her essential equipment, Liv began a tactical withdrawal, moving laterally along the ridge to find a more defensible position. Below, the evacuation continued with nearly half the surviving Marines now safely aboard the helicopters. A few more minutes and the operation would be complete. She just needed to survive those minutes. Finding a narrow cleft between 2 boulders, she set up her final position. From here, she could cover both the approaching enemy fighters and maintain overwatch on the landing zone. The Taliban squad had split into 2 groups, attempting to flank her position from both sides. Liv took aim at the closest fighter, squeezing the trigger with the same controlled precision that had characterized every shot that day. The man fell without a sound. His companions immediately took cover, now aware of her new position. 4 rounds remaining, 7 fighters. In the command center, the evacuation's progress was tracked with clinical precision. Screens displayed the systematic extraction of Marines from what had begun as a death trap and was now transforming into one of the most successful emergency evacuations in recent memory. 3 chalks complete, the operations officer reported. Approximately 60% of personnel extracted. Colonel Harrison stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. The initial shock of Liv's disobedience had transformed into something more complex, a reluctant acknowledgement that her actions, while contrary to direct orders, had saved hundreds of lives. "And Sergeant Reeves?" he asked quietly. Old Bill, who had been monitoring a separate radio frequency, looked up. "Still providing overwatch. But she's got company. Taliban squad closing on her position. Can we extract her?" "Not without compromising the main evacuation. She's too far up the ridge for a standard pickup." Bill's weathered face betrayed no emotion, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the console. She knew the odds when she went up there. Commander Warren, who had been coordinating with the helicopter pilots, turned toward them. "I'm not leaving her up there." His voice carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to having his orders obeyed. "Not again." Harrison's brow furrowed. "Again." "Fallujah," Warren said simply. "We left her behind once before when she saved my team. Classified her actions out of existence because a female sniper making the longest confirmed kill in theater was politically inconvenient." His eyes hardened. "I swore I'd never make that mistake again." Before Harrison could respond, Warren was already moving toward the door. "I need a fast rope team and a little bird, now." On the ridge, Liv had expended all but her final round. The Taliban fighters had worked their way closer now, confident in their numerical superiority. She could hear them calling to each other, coordinating their final assault on her position. Below, the last evacuation helicopter lifted away from the valley floor, heavy with wounded Marines but flying free from the killing zone that had nearly claimed them all. Mission accomplished. 480 Marines, or what remained of them, were safe. Now it was just live one bullet and 7 determined enemies between her and any hope of extraction. She checked her sidearm. The standard issue M9 held a full magazine of 15 rounds plus one in the chamber. Not ideal for the ranging engagement she expected, but better than facing enemy fighters with only a knife. As she prepared for her final stand, a new sound cut through the mountain air, the distinctive chop of rotor blades, but lighter and faster than the Blackhawks that had conducted the main evacuation. A little bird. The nimble helicopter favored by Special Operations Forces for insertions into difficult terrain. The Taliban fighters heard it too. Their advance temporarily halted as they sought the source of the sound. It appeared suddenly from behind the ridgeline, hugging the terrain, with the aggressive posture of an aircraft being flown at the edge of its performance envelope. Liv recognized the maneuver immediately, a hot extraction under fire. Someone was coming for her against all tactical logic and protocol. The little bird hovered 30 feet above the ridgeline, 2 ropes dropping from its doors as 2 figures fast roped to the ground. Even at this distance, Liv recognized Commander Warren's distinctive profile. The SEAL commander had come himself, bringing a single operator with him. The Taliban fighters, momentarily confused by this new development, refocused their attention on this new threat. They opened fire on the SEALs, who immediately sought cover among the rocks. Liv saw her opportunity. With the enemy attention divided, she emerged from her position, her rifle abandoned in favor of her sidearm's mobility. Moving in a low crouch, she approached the nearest Taliban fighter from behind. The M9 barked 3 times in rapid succession. The fighter dropped without knowing what had hit him. His companions turned in confusion, caught between the SEALs in front and an unexpected threat from behind. Warren and his operator used the distraction to advance their suppressed HK-416s, making little sound but delivering devastating effect. 2 more Taliban fighters fell under their precise fire. 4 down, 3 to go. Liv moved again, circling to approach from a different angle. The remaining Taliban fighters, now realizing they were caught in a pincer movement, began a desperate retreat down the ridge. Her sidearm cracked again, dropping another fighter. The final 2 disappeared behind an outcropping, their will to fight apparently broken by the sudden reversal of fortune. Warren approached his weapon, still at the ready, but his eyes bright with something like triumph. "Sergeant Reeves," he said formally, "thought you might need a ride." "Wasn't expecting one, sir." "Yeah, well." The SEAL commander glanced toward the valley where smoke still rose from burning vehicles. "I owed you one from Fallujah." The little bird descended again, hovering just above the ridge, with its skids nearly touching the rocks. No time for conversation or explanation. Warren motioned toward the helicopter. "Time to go, Phantom 7. Your work here is done." The little bird thundered through the Afghan sky, its small frame buffeted by crosswinds as it hugged the contours of the mountains. Inside the cramped cabin, Liv sat with her back pressed against the bulkhead medical gauze, wrapped hastily around her left arm, where shrapnel had torn through the flesh. The steady vibration of the helicopter numbed her extremities, but the pain remained sharp, a constant reminder that she was still alive when so many others weren't. Across from her, Commander Warren monitored her condition with the practiced eye of a man who had seen combat wounds of every variety. His expression remained professionally neutral, but a tension around his eyes betrayed his concern. "That needs proper medical attention," he shouted over the rotor noise, nodding toward her arm. Liv simply nodded. Medical treatment was the least of her concerns. She had disobeyed direct orders, abandoned her post, and independently engaged enemy forces. The fact that her actions had saved hundreds of Marines wouldn't matter in the court-martial that surely awaited her. The military justice system wasn't known for its flexibility regarding chain-of-command violations, particularly from those already viewed with institutional suspicion. The radio crackled, and Warren pressed his headset tighter against his ear to hear over the engine noise. His expression darkened as he listened, then he turned to Liv. "Change of plans. We're rerouting to Forward Operating Base Thunder." Colonel Harrison's orders. FOB Thunder was smaller than Firebase Liberty, primarily used for special operations and intelligence gathering. The change in destination could mean many things, none of them particularly reassuring. "Am I under arrest?" Liv asked, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Warren's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile under different circumstances. "Technically, that would require paperwork I'm not inclined to file." He checked that the pilot wasn't listening. "Let's just say you're being debriefed at an alternative location." The little bird banked sharply, dropping altitude as it approached a cluster of buildings nestled in a protected valley. FOB Thunder appeared suddenly from behind a ridge, a collection of prefabricated structures surrounded by HESCO barriers and razor wire. Unlike the larger Firebase Liberty, this installation maintained a deliberately low profile, its presence in the region known to few outside special operations channels. They touched down on a small landing pad, the rotor wash kicking up dust that momentarily obscured their surroundings. As the engines wound down, Warren gestured for Liv to follow him. Two operators in unmarked tactical gear approached, their faces impassive beneath wraparound sunglasses. "Take Sergeant Reeves to medical," Warren ordered. "Then briefing room 3. "Yes, sir," one of the operators replied, then turned to Liv. "This way, Sergeant." The medical facility was small but well-equipped, another indication of FOB Thunder's specialized nature. The doctor, a middle-aged man with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much trauma, treated her wounds with efficient professionalism, asking no questions about how she'd received them. "The arm will be fine," he said as he finished applying fresh bandages. "Superficial tissue damage, no nerve involvement. You're lucky." Luck had nothing to do with it, Liv thought. Skill and training had kept her alive on that ridge, not fortune's random blessings. After medical, the operators escorted her to a windowless room in the center of the compound. Inside, a conference table occupied most of the available space, its surface bare, except for a digital recorder and a sealed folder marked Classified Phantom Program. "Wait here," one of the operators instructed before leaving and securing the door behind him. Alone for the first time since the ridge, Liv felt the full weight of exhaustion descend upon her. Her body ached from the sustained physical exertion, and her mind struggled to process the events of the past hours. She had gone from ignored support officer to battlefield savior to what prisoner asset scapegoat. The uncertainty was almost worse than the pain. The door opened 15 minutes later, admitting Commander Warren and surprisingly old Bill Carter. The retired master sergeant moved with the stiffness of someone whose joints protested every movement, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. "Sergeant Reeves," Warren began formally activating the digital recorder. "This is Commander Mark Warren conducting preliminary debrief of actions taken during Operation Valley Sweep. Please state your name and rank for the record." Liv straightened in her chair. "Staff Sergeant Olivia Reeves, United States Marine Corps." "Let's start with the basics. What prompted your decision to leave Firebase Liberty and engage enemy forces without authorization?" The question was direct but not accusatory. Warren's tone suggested he was building a record rather than conducting an interrogation. "Marines were dying, sir," Liv replied simply. "I had the skills and position knowledge to prevent further casualties. No other support was available within the critical time frame." "You directly disobeyed Colonel Harrison's orders regarding the 200-meter proximity restriction." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Liv met his gaze unflinchingly. "Because sometimes regulations cost more lives than they save. The restriction exists to prevent friendly fire incidents from close air support. It wasn't applicable to precision rifle fire from a qualified sniper." Warren nodded, then gestured to the folder on the table. "Are you familiar with the contents of this file?" "I'm familiar with the Phantom program." "Yes, sir." "For the record, please explain your connection to this program." Liv hesitated, glancing at old Bill, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "5 years ago, I was recruited into a specialized unit designated Phantom," she began, her voice measured and precise. "The program identified and deployed exceptional snipers for high-risk operations where conventional forces couldn't be utilized. Missions were classified at the highest levels, with operational details compartmentalized even within the command structure." She paused, organizing her thoughts. This was the first time she had spoken openly about the program since its official termination, 3 years earlier. "I served as Phantom 7, the designation indicating my position within the unit hierarchy. My primary deployment was in Fallujah, Iraq, where I conducted overwatch operations for various special operations units. Warren leaned forward, including a Delta Force extraction on November 14, 2009. Yes, sir. For the record, Commander Warren was the tactical leader of that Delta unit, Old Bill interjected. 30 operators surrounded in an urban environment, multiple hostile forces closing from all directions. Extraction impossible due to heavy machine gun and RPG fire from entrenched positions. Warren's expression remained professionally neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, the memory of that day still fresh, despite the intervening years. Sergeant Reeves, operating under the call sign Phantom 7, eliminated 14 high-value targets in 19 minutes, including 3 machine gun nests and 4 RPG teams, Bill continued. Shot distances ranging from 650 to 1,430 meters, the latter being the longest confirmed kill by any American sniper in Iraq at that time. Liv sat silently as Bill recounted the operation. She remembered every shot, every calculation, every life she had taken that day. The mission had been her first as Phantom 7, and the success had earned her both a classified commendation and the program's highest confidence. It had also marked the beginning of the end for her combat career. What happened after Fallujah? Warren prompted, though he clearly knew the answer. Liv's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The mission was deemed politically sensitive. A female sniper recording the longest confirmed kill in theater contradicted certain narratives regarding women in combat roles. My involvement was classified, my record modified, and I was reassigned to support duties. And the Phantom program officially disbanded 3 years ago due to operational redundancy. The bitterness in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. In reality, the political climate couldn't accommodate a program that utilized female operators in direct combat roles, regardless of qualification or effectiveness. Warren nodded, then reached over and switched off the digital recorder. The formal debrief had apparently concluded, replaced by something more candid. Off the record now, he said, his posture relaxing slightly. You recognized the ambush setup, didn't you? That's why you were so insistent during the mission briefing. Yes, sir. The tactical arrangement was textbook Spetsnaz, specifically the configuration taught by Master Sergeant Volkov during joint training exercises at Fort Benning. Volkov. Warren's expression darkened. We've been tracking him for 3 years. Former Russian special forces now working as a private contractor for various non-state actors. Suspected involvement in at least 12 ambushes against coalition forces, all with similar signatures. He was there, Liv confirmed, Eastern Ridge coordinating the machine gun placements. He was my first target. Warren and Old Bill exchanged glances that contained volumes of unspoken communication. You're certain? Bill asked. Positive. I recognized his movements, his positioning. He taught us that exact ambush configuration, called it the perfect trap for vehicle convoys in restricted terrain. Warren stood and paced the small room, his movements betraying a tension that his voice carefully controlled. Volkov's elimination changes the operational landscape significantly. He's been the primary force multiplier for Taliban operations in this region. His tactical knowledge transformed disorganized insurgents into effective fighting forces. Which brings us to why you're here instead of facing Colonel Harrison's wrath back at Liberty, Bill added, leaning forward. Your actions today caught the attention of some very senior people. Liv's eyes narrowed slightly. What people? The kind who officially don't exist, Warren replied, making decisions about programs that were never authorized. Understanding dawned on Liv's face. They're reactivating Phantom. Not exactly. Warren returned to his seat. The program as it existed is gone. Too much scrutiny, too many oversight committees. What's being proposed is something more adaptive. He slid a new folder across the table, this one unmarked, its contents visible only when he opened it to reveal surveillance photos of known terrorist leaders alongside maps of regions far from Afghanistan. Global Special Activities Division, he explained. Black budget, compartmentalized command structure, zero public footprint, utilizing specialists with unique skill sets for high-value target elimination in non-permissive environments. And you want me? Liv stated not a question, but a recognition of where the conversation was heading. You've demonstrated exceptional capabilities under extreme pressure, Warren confirmed. More importantly, you've shown the judgment and moral clarity necessary for independent operations. When systems fail, when protocols become obstacles rather than assets, you make the right call anyway, even if it means disobeying direct orders, especially then. Warren's expression was deadly serious. The missions we're discussing exist outside conventional command structures. Operators need to evaluate situations and make decisions without waiting for approvals that may never come. Liv studied the folder's contents, her tactical mind already assessing potential approaches and complications for each target. The proposition was both tempting and troubling, a chance to utilize her skills to their fullest extent, but in a shadowy world where accountability might be as absent as oversight. "What happens to Sergeant Reeves?" she asked finally. "The Marine with a court-martial pending for insubordination." Old Bill smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Funny thing about that, seems there was a communication error during the Valley Sweep operation. Your presence on Hell's Ridge was actually part of a classified joint operation authorized at levels above Colonel Harrison's pay grade. A convenient fiction." "The best kind," Bill agreed. "Backdated orders are being inserted into the record as we speak. By tomorrow, your actions will be not only legal, but commendable." And the Marines who witnessed what happened, the ones who heard Warren identify me as Phantom 7 over the radio. "Combat creates confusion," Warren said simply. "Memories become unreliable under stress. Witness statements contradict each other. The official record becomes the accepted truth regardless of individual recollections." Liv wasn't entirely comfortable with this manipulation of reality, despite it working in her favor. The ease with which official history could be rewritten was disturbing even when the purpose seemed justified. "I need time to consider this," she said finally. Warren nodded. 48 hours. After that, the offer disappears and we return to the original timeline court-martial, dishonorable discharge, end of career. Not much of a choice. "The best operators rarely get easy choices," Bill observed. "That's why they're the best. They make the hard calls when others can't or won't." Before Liv could respond, the door opened to admit a communications specialist. "Commander, urgent message from Firebase Liberty. Colonel Harrison is demanding Sergeant Reeves' immediate return for disciplinary proceedings." Warren's expression didn't change. "Tell the Colonel that Sergeant Reeves is currently engaged in a classified debriefing regarding Joint Special Operations. She will return to Firebase Liberty when that process is complete." "Yes, sir." The specialist departed, closing the door behind him. "Harrison won't be satisfied with that answer," Bill warned. "He doesn't have the clearance to demand satisfaction," Warren replied dismissively. "By the time the bureaucratic dust settles, our business here will be concluded one way or another." He turned back to Liv. "Rest. Recover. Consider the offer. We'll reconvene at 0800 the day after tomorrow for your decision." After they left, Liv remained seated, staring at the classified folder still open on the table. The faces of targets stared back at her men responsible for orchestrating attacks that had killed hundreds of American personnel and countless civilians. Men who operated from the shadows, avoiding conventional military response through careful insulation and plausible deniability. Men who would never face justice unless someone like her brought it to them. She closed the folder and leaned back, fatigue washing over her in waves. The decision before her was more complex than a simple career choice. It was about identity, purpose, and the kind of soldier, the kind of person she wanted to be. As darkness fell over a Phobe Thunder, Liv was escorted to sparse but private quarters. Sleep came quickly, but brought no resolution to the questions that would determine her future. The dreams that followed were filled with the faces of the Marines she had saved, intermingled with those she had killed from her lonely perch above the valley. Dawn at Phobe Thunder arrived with the muted activity characteristic of special operations bases, purposeful movement without unnecessary noise, efficiency without ceremony. Liv woke before sunrise, her body conditioned to early rising despite the previous day's exertions. The dull ache in her wounded arm had subsided to a manageable discomfort, allowing her to perform her morning routine with minimal adaptation. After a Spartan breakfast in the small mess facility, she found herself drawn to the base's modest firing range. The familiar environment offered a comfort that transcended location. The measured distances, the paper targets, the disciplined rhythm of controlled shooting. Here at least the world made sense in a way it hadn't since she'd left Hell's Ridge. She was examining a rack of specialized rifles when a voice spoke from behind her. "Figured I'd find you here." Liv turned to see Lieutenant Miller. his right arm immobilized in a sling, his face bearing the cuts and bruises of yesterday's battle. Despite his injuries, he stood tall, his posture reflecting the resilience that had helped him lead his Marines through the valley ambush. "Lieutenant," she acknowledged, surprised to see him at FOB Thunder. "I didn't realize you'd been brought here." Medical evac routed the most serious cases to the field hospital at Bagram, Miller explained. Those of us with less urgent injuries were diverted here for treatment and debriefing. He gestured to his immobilized arm. "Clean break. I'll be back in action within 6 weeks." There was an awkward pause as both recognized the unspoken subject hanging between them, Liv's unauthorized intervention and its impact on the battlefield. "I came to thank you," Miller said finally, his voice low but intense. "What you did out there, you saved my men, saved me." He swallowed hard emotion, briefly breaking through his professional demeanor. "We were dead, all of us, until you started dropping tangos from that ridge." Liv nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude she felt she didn't deserve. "I did what needed doing. Anyone would have. But they didn't. You did." Miller stepped closer. "I heard Commander Warren on the radio. Phantom 7. A mixture of awe and curiosity colored his voice. "The stories about you, I always thought they were just rumors, sniper folklore." "Most of them probably are," Liv replied carefully, uncertain how much Miller knew or should know. "Combat creates legends faster than truth can contain them." "Not this time." Miller's expression was earnest. "I watched you systematically dismantle an ambush that had us completely pinned down. Shots that shouldn't have been possible under those conditions. And you did it alone against orders, knowing what it would cost you." He shook his head in amazement. "If that's not legendary, I don't know what is." Before Liv could respond, the door to the range opened again to admit Sergeant Donovan. The burly Marine moved with the stiffness of someone nursing multiple injuries, a thick bandage visible at his collar, where shrapnel had caught him during the initial attack. His presence created an immediate tension. Donovan had been among the most vocal critics of Liv's position in the unit, his contempt for what he called quota Marines, barely disguised behind professional courtesy. Now he stood awkwardly in the doorway, his usual swagger replaced by an uncertain hesitation. "Lieutenant," he acknowledged Miller, then turned to Liv. "Sergeant Reeves, got a minute?" Miller glanced between them, sensing the complex history. "I'll give you two some space. Sergeant Reeves will talk more later." He nodded respectfully and departed, leaving Liv alone with her most persistent detractor. Donovan remained by the door as if uncertain whether to advance or retreat. The confident Marine who had mocked her in the mess hall seemed diminished somehow, replaced by a man struggling to reconcile his beliefs with recent experience. "How's the neck?" Liv asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "Hurts like hell," Donovan admitted, touching the bandage reflexively. "Doc says I was lucky. Another inch to the left," and he trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging between them. "You led your squad well," Liv offered. "I saw you organizing the defensive position near the northern extraction point. Good use of limited cover." Donovan nodded, accepting the professional assessment. "Wasn't enough. We were getting slaughtered until—" He hesitated, then continued with visible effort. "Until you started taking out their gun positions from the ridge." He took a deep breath, clearly struggling with what he needed to say next. "I was wrong about you, Reeves. Wrong about a lot of things." The admission clearly cost him, each word extracted against the resistance of pride and ingrained belief. Donovan was a product of traditional military culture, where certain truths were held as self-evident, among them that combat roles belonged to men with exceptions made only for political expediency rather than merit. "I called you dead weight," he continued, the words coming more freely now. "Said you were just filling a quota, and then you saved every one of us from that ridge." He met her eyes directly for perhaps the first time. "I owe you my life. So do 43 Marines who made it out because of what you did." "You don't owe me anything, Sergeant," Liv replied quietly. "We're Marines. We do what's necessary when it's necessary." "Yeah, well," Donovan shifted uncomfortably. "Not all of us had the guts to disobey a direct order, even when it was clearly the right call." His expression darkened. "Is it true what they're saying, that Harrison is pushing for a court-martial?" "Probably," Liv acknowledged. "Disobeying orders during combat operations isn't something the Corps takes lightly, regardless of outcome." "That's bullshit," Donovan said with unexpected vehemence. Every Marine in that valley is ready to testify that you saved the entire battalion. Harrison can't just, he can, Liv interrupted gently. And he probably should. Chain of command exists for a reason. Without it, we're just armed individuals with conflicting priorities. Donovan stared at her, confusion evident in his expression. You're defending him after he nearly got us all killed by ignoring your warning about the ambush. I'm defending the system, flawed as it sometimes is. Liv picked up one of the range rifles, checking its balance with practiced hands. The rules matter, Donovan, even especially when breaking them is necessary. That doesn't make any sense, doesn't it? She replaced the rifle carefully on the rack. If I believed rules didn't matter, I would have ignored them casually without consequence. But I knew exactly what disobeying that order would cost me, and I accepted that cost because the alternative was unacceptable. Understanding dawned slowly on Donovan's face. You're saying the system works because people like you are willing to sacrifice themselves when it fails. Something like that, Liv agreed, though I wouldn't put it quite so dramatically. Donovan was silent for a moment, processing this perspective that contradicted his more binary view of military ethics. Finally, he straightened, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injuries. Whatever happens, you should know that the Marines who were in that valley won't forget what you did, me especially. He extended his hand, a gesture that bridged the gulf that had existed between them since Liv's arrival at Firebase Liberty. Thank you, Sergeant Reeves. Liv accepted the handshake, recognizing it as more significant than the simple words that accompanied it. In that moment, she wasn't a female Marine, or a quota sniper, or an outsider in a male-dominated world. She was simply a Marine who had done her duty when it mattered most, recognized as such by a fellow warrior who had finally seen past his own prejudices. After Donovan left, Liv remained at the range, the encounter having stirred thoughts she'd been avoiding since arriving at FOB Thunder. The gratitude of the Marines she had saved was a powerful counterweight to the official consequences awaiting her. It raised questions about where true duty lay, to the letter of orders, or to the lives those orders were meant to protect. She was still considering these questions when a young communications specialist appeared at the door. Sergeant Reeves, Commander Warren requests your presence in the Operations Center immediately. The Operations Center occupied the most secure building in FOB Thunder, its entrance guarded by operators who verified identities with methodical precision. Inside, the facility resembled a scaled-down version of the command center at Firebase Liberty. Multiple displays showing tactical information, communication stations monitoring various frequencies, and the controlled urgency of personnel managing ongoing operations. Commander Warren stood at the central console, engaged in low conversation with a figure whose presence surprised Liv. Colonel Harrison, his uniform immaculate despite the dusty environment, his posture rigid with barely contained tension. When Liv entered, both men turned. Warren's expression remained neutral, but Harrison's face tightened visibly, his eyes cold with suppressed anger. Sergeant Reeves, Harrison acknowledged stiffly. I see your arm has been treated. Yes, sir, Liv replied, maintaining the formal professionalism expected despite the obvious tension. Colonel Harrison has some questions regarding yesterday's operations. Warren explained, his tone carefully measured. I suggested a joint debrief would be most efficient. Harrison's jaw tightened at the word joint, suggesting this arrangement hadn't been his idea. Sergeant, I want to be absolutely clear about the chain of events. You left Firebase Liberty without authorization, carrying a weapon not assigned for the operation, and proceeded to engage enemy forces in direct violation of standing orders. Is that correct? The question was a trap designed to extract an admission of guilt that could be used in subsequent disciplinary proceedings. Before Liv could respond, Warren intervened smoothly. I believe there's been some confusion regarding Sergeant Reeves' operational status, Colonel. As I explained earlier, her deployment to the Northern Ridge was authorized under the Special Directive 7-3 Alpha. Harrison's expression darkened. A directive I was never made aware of, despite being the commanding officer of the base in operation. Compartmentalization is standard for sensitive operations, Warren replied with practiced ease. Need-to-know protocols sometimes create unavoidable command friction. Regrettable but necessary. The exchange was fascinating to observe, a bureaucratic chess match played with careers and reputations as pieces. Harrison clearly didn't believe the retroactive authorization story, but lacked the clearance to directly challenge it. Warren, operating with the backing of unnamed higher authorities, Maintain the fiction with the confidence of someone accustomed to rewriting operational narratives. Sergeant Harrison turned his attention back to Liv. Did you receive direct orders from Commander Warren regarding your position on the ridge? Another trap. A yes would contradict the operational record showing Warren's location during the battle. A no would undermine the special directive narrative. Sir, I received my instructions through established channels appropriate to the nature of the operation, Liv replied carefully. Operational security protocols prevent me from discussing specific command pathways in this setting. It was a non-answer wrapped in security jargon, exactly the kind of response that special operations personnel used when avoiding direct questions about unauthorized activities. Harrison recognized it immediately, his expression hardening further. I see. His voice was cold. It seems everyone has been thoroughly briefed on the appropriate responses except the officer commanding the operation and responsible for the lives of 480 Marines. Your concern for your Marines does you credit, Colonel, Warren said smoothly. The same concern that motivated Sergeant Reeves' actions, which ultimately saved hundreds of lives. Don't presume to lecture me about concern for my Marines, Commander. Harrison's control slipped momentarily, raw emotion breaking through his professional facade. I've been burying good men for 20 years. I've written more condolence letters than you've written mission reports. I don't need a SEAL telling me what motivates a Marine. The outburst hung in the air, unexpected and revealing. For the first time, Liv glimpsed the man beneath the rigid exterior, not just a rule-bound commander, but a leader carrying the weight of lives lost under his command. Someone whose adherence to protocol might stem not from inflexibility, but from the hard-learned lesson that discipline saved lives more consistently than heroics. Warren seemed to recognize this too, his approach shifting subtly. You're right, Colonel, I overstepped. Your record speaks for itself. He moved to a nearby console and entered a series of commands. The main display changed to show a tactical overview of the Korengal Valley with animated markers representing the movements of both friendly and enemy forces during yesterday's battle. What I can show you, however, is the operational reality. This is compiled from drone footage, survivor reports, and Sergeant Reeves's observation position. Warren manipulated the controls, advancing the simulation. At 0942, your convoy was ambushed by approximately 150 Taliban fighters augmented by professional military advisors. Their positions here, and here, he indicated points on the ridgelines, created interlocking fields of fire that eliminated any possibility of conventional extraction. The simulation continued, showing the devastating initial minutes of the ambush. Red markers representing Marine casualties multiplied rapidly as the trapped convoy took fire from all directions. By 0957, 15 minutes into the engagement, casualties had reached critical levels. Available air support was still 12 minutes out, with serious questions about its effectiveness, given the dispersed nature of enemy positions and proximity to friendly forces. Warren paused the simulation and looked directly at Harrison. Colonel, I've reviewed the tactical data exhaustively. There was no scenario in which your Marines survived without the precision intervention Sergeant Reeves provided. None. Harrison studied the display, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice had regained its professional detachment. The 200-meter proximity restriction exists for a reason, Commander. It's written in blood. As are many regulations, Warren acknowledged. The question is whether rigid adherence to those regulations in exceptional circumstances serves their underlying purpose or subverts it. A convenient philosophy when you're not the one answerable for the consequences, Harrison observed dryly. On the contrary, Warren countered, special operations exist precisely to assume responsibility for high-risk decisions outside conventional parameters. The potential consequences of Sergeant Reeves' actions fell squarely on her shoulders. She accepted that burden knowingly. Harrison turned to Liv, studying her with renewed attention. Did you fully understand what you were risking, Sergeant? Yes, sir, Liv replied, without hesitation. My career at minimum. Potentially my freedom, depending on how the violation was classified. And you considered it worth that price. 480 Marines were worth that price, sir. Harrison held her gaze for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, not quite approval, but perhaps a reluctant recognition of shared values beneath their different approaches. I've received orders regarding your status. Sergeant, he said finally, effective immediately, you're being transferred to Special Operations Command for Advanced Tactical Deployment Training. Your record at Firebase Liberty will show an honorable reassignment with commendation for actions during Operation Valley Sweep. The official fiction was being implemented, erasing both her insubordination and the system's failure in a single bureaucratic stroke. Thank you, sir, Liv replied, recognizing that Harrison was conceding the battle while preserving what dignity the situation allowed him. Don't thank me, Sergeant. I had no choice in the matter. Harrison straightened, adjusting his uniform in a habitual gesture. But off the record, what you did required exceptional courage, both physical and moral. The Marines who returned from that valley owe you their lives. He turned to Warren. I trust Special Operations will utilize Sergeant Reeves' capabilities more effectively than I was permitted to. That's the plan, Colonel, Warren confirmed. Harrison nodded sharply, then departed without further comment, his rigid posture betraying none of the complex emotions the encounter must have stirred. After he left, Warren turned to Liv. Well, that's one hurdle cleared. Harrison's cooperation simplifies the transition considerably. He didn't seem particularly cooperative, Liv observed. He didn't fight it, Warren countered. For a man like Harrison, that's practically enthusiastic support. He gestured to a nearby chair. Sit. We need to discuss next steps. Liv complied, suddenly aware of the fatigue that still lingered from yesterday's exertions. I thought I had 48 hours to consider your offer. Circumstances have accelerated the timeline. Warren activated a secure terminal, bringing up a series of classified intelligence reports. Volkov's elimination has created a power vacuum that various actors are rushing to fill. We've intercepted communications indicating a high-level meeting of Taliban leadership with their foreign advisors scheduled for tomorrow night. He pulled up satellite imagery of a compound in the mountains near the Pakistan border. This location has been dormant for months. Suddenly, it's showing significant activity, vehicle movements, increased security communication spikes. A rare concentration of high-value targets. Liv noted, her tactical mind already analyzing approach vectors and firing positions. Precisely. Intelligence estimates at least 5 Tier 1 targets will be present, possibly including individuals connected to the 2008 Islamabad embassy bombing. Warren's expression was intense, the professional detachment momentarily replaced by personal investment. This is the kind of opportunity that appears once in a decade, if that. Liv studied the imagery, understanding immediately why this had accelerated their timeline. You need a precision asset in place before the meeting. We need you in place, Warren corrected. The terrain and security make conventional approaches impossible. Airstrike risks, border incidents with Pakistan. This requires a single operator inserted quietly with the skills to execute multiple precision eliminations under adverse conditions. My specialty, Liv acknowledged without either pride or modesty. Your unique capability, Warren agreed. No one else in theater has demonstrated your particular combination of long-distance accuracy, tactical patience, and independent judgment. The implied compliment carried more weight coming from Warren than from most. A SEAL commander didn't offer praise lightly, particularly to someone from another service branch. This would be my first mission under the new arrangement, Liv asked it, seeking clarity on the operational parameters. Consider it an audition, Warren replied. Successful completion confirms your transition to the Special Activities Division. Operational parameters will be similar to your previous work, with phantom independent deployment, minimal support, maximum deniability. Liv considered the proposal carefully. The opportunity was exceptional from a tactical perspective. Eliminating multiple high-value targets could significantly degrade enemy capabilities across the region. Yet the accelerated timeline felt manipulative, forcing a decision before she'd fully processed the implications of this career change. I need to know one thing, she said finally. In Fallujah, after the operation, you knew what happened. You knew they buried my involvement for political reasons. She met his gaze directly. Why didn't you say something then? Warren's expression tightened, a flash of what might have been regret crossing his features. Chain of command, rules of engagement, the same principles Harrison just invoked. He sighed, the professional mask slipping to reveal the man beneath. And if I'm being honest, I didn't fight hard enough. 30 of my men came home because of you, and I let them erase what you did from history. The admission hung between them, not an excuse, but an acknowledgement of a failure he clearly still carried. This mission, Warren continued after a moment, consider it more than an opportunity. Consider it a correction. The beginning of a record that can't be erased or rewritten to suit political convenience. It was perhaps the most honest recruiting pitch Liv had ever heard, appealing not to patriotism or duty, but to a deeper need for recognition and purpose that transcended institutional approval. The kind of recognition that came not from medals or commendations, but from the knowledge that one's skills were being utilized to their fullest potential for a cause that mattered. I'll need equipment specifications, Liv said, her decision made. Terrain-appropriate ghillie night vision with thermal capability and a custom load for the environmental conditions. Warren's expression shifted to one of carefully controlled satisfaction. Already being prepared, mission briefing in 3 hours, insertion at dusk. He stood extending his hand. Welcome to the Division Phantom 7. As they shook hands, Liv felt the weight of the moment, not just a new mission or even a new role, but a fundamental shift in her relationship with the institution she had served since leaving her father's Texas ranch. No longer would she be constrained by conventional command structures or limited by others' perceptions of her capabilities. From this point forward, she would operate in the shadows where results mattered more than appearances and skill transcended gender. For better or worse, Olivia Reeves was becoming something new, a ghost in the military machine, visible only through the precision of her work and the absence of those she was sent to eliminate. The realization should have been troubling. Instead, it felt like coming home. The briefing room hummed with the focused energy of special operations planning, multiple specialists, reviewing intelligence data, terrain models, and meteorological reports with the precision of surgeons preparing for a complex procedure. At the center of this controlled chaos stood Olivia Reeves, absorbing information with the quiet intensity that had become her trademark. Satellite passes confirmed continued activity at the compound. An intelligence officer reported manipulating a 3D terrain display. Vehicle movement suggests additional arrivals expected throughout the day. Security perimeter has been established here, and here with roving patrols in these sectors. Liv studied the model, identifying and mentally cataloging potential infiltration routes, hide positions, and most critically, exfiltration options. The mission profile was demanding even by special operations standards. Insert via halo jump, 10 miles from the target, approach on foot through mountainous terrain, establish a shooting position with line of sight to the compound, eliminate primary targets during their scheduled meeting, then extract to a predetermined pickup point 20 miles south of the border. Total mission duration approximately 36 hours. Support available none. Wind conditions are problematic, a meteorologist noted, highlighting weather patterns on a separate display. Mountain Valley creates unpredictable cross currents, particularly during early morning and late afternoon transitions. Recommend primary engagement window between 2200 and 200 hours for maximum stability. Commander Warren entered accompanied by Old Bill Carter and, surprisingly, Lieutenant Miller, his injured arm still immobilized, but his presence suggesting an operational role rather than mere observation. Final checks, Warren announced. Equipment status? Customized to specifications, an armorer replied. M48-5 with enhanced Schmidt and Bender PM-T2 scope, match-grade ammunition, hand-loaded for environmental conditions, suppressor optimized for subsonic performance. Insertion logistics. Halo team ready, weather window confirmed optimal between 1930 and 2100 hours, a jump master reported. Primary and secondary drop zones identified and marked on tactical displays. Extraction plan. Miller stepped forward, indicating a route on the terrain model. I'll be commanding the extraction team. 2 modified Little Birds operating at extreme range insertion at this ridgeline, approximately 5 kilometers from the Pakistan border. Operational window is narrow, 20 minutes from touchdown to departure. Liv looked up, surprised by this information. You're leading the extraction, Lieutenant, with your injury. I'm not cleared for combat operations, Miller acknowledged, but I can still pilot, and I requested this assignment specifically. His expression was resolute. After what you did for us in the valley, I wasn't about to let someone else handle your extraction. The sentiment behind the gesture was clear. Miller was ensuring that someone with personal investment in her safe return would be commanding the most critical phase of the mission. After the isolation of her previous operations, this demonstration of solidarity was unexpectedly affecting. Thank you, Lieutenant, she said simply. Final decision point. Warren interjected, bringing the focus back to mission parameters. Intelligence indicates a 92% probability that Target Alpha Taliban Regional Commander Hakim Gul will be present at the compound tonight. However, we've just received information suggesting an additional high-value target may attend. He activated a secure terminal, bringing up a classified file with a grainy photograph of a man in his 50s, his features bearing the weathered quality of someone who had spent years in harsh mountain conditions. Nikolai Kovalev, Warren identified, former GRU Special Operations, now freelance military advisor to various terrorist organizations. He was Volkov's mentor and superior officer before both left Russian service for more lucrative private contracts. Liv studied the photograph with focused attention. Volkov's death would have created a significant gap in their operational capabilities. Kovalev coming personally suggests they're concerned about maintaining tactical effectiveness. Exactly our assessment, Warren agreed. His presence represents both an exceptional opportunity and an increased threat. Kovalev is considerably more experienced than Volkov, with an uncanny ability to identify and counter sniper operations specifically. He'll be expecting us, Liv concluded, or something like us. Likely, intelligence suggests he's bringing his own counter-sniper team as security. Warren's expression was grave. This changes the risk profile significantly. Standard protocol would be to delay the operation until we can insert a larger force with appropriate support. The implication was clear: this was no longer a standard precision elimination, but potentially a direct confrontation with experienced counter-sniper specialists led by one of the most dangerous men in the region. The odds had shifted from challenging to potentially prohibitive. "Your call, Sergeant," Warren said quietly. "We can pull back, develop a different approach." Liv considered the options carefully. Delay meant losing a rare opportunity to eliminate multiple high-value targets simultaneously. It also meant allowing Kovalev to establish a new operational infrastructure potentially more dangerous than what had existed before. Yet proceeding meant facing opponents specifically trained to counter her exact capabilities, led by a man whose reputation suggested tactical brilliance bordering on prescience. "I'm proceeding as planned," she decided finally. Kovalev's presence increases the mission value beyond the additional risk. Warren studied her face, perhaps looking for signs of bravado or recklessness. Finding none, he nodded sharply. "Approved, but we're adjusting extraction protocols. Lieutenant Miller will maintain position at the primary extraction point for 45 minutes beyond the scheduled window, with authorization to extend further if tactical conditions warrant." "Understood," Miller confirmed. "We'll be there as long as necessary." Old Bill, who had remained silent throughout the briefing, approached Liv as the others began final preparations. His weathered face carried an expression she hadn't seen before, a mixture of pride and concern that transcended professional detachment. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly, his voice roughened by emotion he rarely displayed. "Not just of what you're doing, but of why you're doing it." "I hope so," Liv replied, the mention of her father striking deeper than she had expected. Bill reached into his pocket and removed something small, a worn metal disc that Liv recognized immediately. The Marine Corps sniper insignia, its edges smoothed by years of handling. "This belonged to Jack," Bill explained. "He carried it through 2 wars, said it reminded him what he was fighting for, not just country, but the people who would inherit the world we leave behind." He pressed it into her palm. "Figured you should have it now. Might bring the same luck for you it did for him." The gesture carried a weight beyond its physical presence, a passing of legacy, a connection to the man who had first placed a rifle in her hands and taught her that precision was more than accuracy. It was responsibility. The metal was warm against her skin, as if retaining some essence of her father's spirit across the years since his death. "Thank you," Liv said, closing her fingers around the token. "I'll bring it back." "You damn well better," Bill replied gruffly. "Still got things to teach you." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of the jumpmaster. "Gear up time, Sergeant. Transport leaves in 30 minutes. As Liv moved to collect her equipment, Warren fell into step beside her. "One last thing you should know," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Kovalev was there, in Fallujah." Liv stopped. "What?" Intelligence was never confirmed, but pattern analysis suggests he was directing operations against coalition forces in that sector. The ambush that trapped my team, it had his signature elements. The information settled like a weight in Liv's chest, not fear, but a crystallization of purpose. This mission was no longer just an operation or even a redemption. It was the closure of a circle that had begun 5 years earlier in the dusty streets of Fallujah. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. Warren nodded, understanding the implications. Godspeed, Phantom 7. The preparations that followed carried the methodical precision that characterized special operations equipment, checked and rechecked. Mission parameters, reviewed contingencies established for every foreseeable complication. Throughout Liv, maintained the focused calm that had become her center. Each action deliberate and purposeful as she prepared to once again assume the solitary responsibility of long-distance precision in service of lives she would never know. As dusk approached, she boarded the aircraft that would carry her to the insertion point. Her equipment secured, her mind already shifting into the operational mindset that would govern the coming days. The metal disc from her father rested in a secure pocket, its presence a talisman, connecting past to present, legacy to future. The aircraft lifted off, carrying Olivia Reeves toward a confrontation that would determine not just the success of a mission, but the nature of the path that stretched beyond it. Behind her, Firebase Liberty continued its operational routine, the events of the Korangal Valley already fading into the background noise of ongoing combat operations. But in the minds of 480 Marines who had survived that valley, the memory of precision fire raining down from Hell's Ridge would remain vivid, a testament to the difference one person could make when skill met courage at the critical moment of decision. And in a small room at FOB Thunder, old Bill Carter stood at a window watching the aircraft disappear into the darkening sky, his weathered face set in the expression of a man who had sent too many young soldiers toward danger. He touched his chest where a matching insignia had once rested, then whispered words meant for ears far beyond human hearing. "Watch over her, Jack. She's carrying your legacy now." The future stretched before them all, uncertain as always in war. But one thing remained clear as the Afghan night descended. Phantom 7 had returned from the shadows, and the battlefield would never be the same. Darkness enveloped the mountains as Liv moved silently through the rugged terrain. 36 hours into her mission, her muscles burned with fatigue, but her mind remained razor-sharp. Through her scope, she observed the compound, where 5 high-value targets, including Kovalev, had gathered. Security was tight, roving patrols, counter-sniper teams, and electronic surveillance creating layers of protection that would have deterred anyone less determined. From her hide position 200 meters away, Liv had spent the past 6 hours studying the patterns of movement, identifying weaknesses. The metal disc from her father rested in her pocket, a tangible connection to the legacy that had brought her here. "Time to finish what started in Fallujah," she whispered to herself. The meeting was underway in the compound's main building, Taliban leadership and their foreign advisors discussing strategy following Volkov's elimination. Through her thermal scope, Liv could distinguish the heat signatures, one particular figure standing apart from the others. Taller, more rigid in posture, gesturing with the precision of a military instructor. Kovalev. She made final adjustments for wind and temperature, her calculations accounting for variables most snipers would consider insurmountable. The first shot would trigger immediate countermeasures, leaving her seconds to eliminate remaining targets before security protocols activated. Liv exhaled completely, her heartbeat slowing to a measured rhythm. The crosshairs settled on Kovalev's chest as he stood at what appeared to be a tactical display. She squeezed the trigger with practiced precision. The suppressed rifle coughed. Through the scope, she watched Kovalev jerk backward, confusion registering on his face in the instant before he collapsed. Without pausing, Liv shifted to the next target, a Taliban commander gesturing frantically. Another shot, another body falling. Chaos erupted in the compound. Lights cut out as security protocols engaged, but Liv's thermal optics rendered the darkness meaningless. 3 more precision shots eliminated the remaining targets in less than 12 seconds. Shouts in Pashto and Russian echoed across the valley. Searchlights activated, sweeping the surrounding ridgelines. Counter-sniper teams deployed, setting up a methodical search pattern, professionals recognizing they faced a professional. Liv was already moving, breaking down her position, with practiced efficiency, erasing all evidence of her presence. She had 20 minutes to reach the extraction point before Miller's helicopters would be forced to depart. Halfway to the extraction point, she heard the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle, the round passing inches from her head. A counter-sniper had spotted her movement. Rolling into cover behind a boulder, she calculated the shooter's position from the sound and muzzle flash. "Not today," she breathed, drawing her sidearm. The M9's familiar weight steadied her as she waited for the counter-sniper to make a mistake. When it came a slight shift of position, revealing an outline against the starlit sky, Liv fired twice. The dark silhouette crumpled and disappeared. She reached the extraction point with 3 minutes remaining in the window, her uniform torn and bloody from a grazing wound received during her escape. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors cut through the night air as Miller's little birds approached, hugging the terrain to avoid detection. The first helicopter touched down, rotors still spinning, as a SEAL team established a defensive perimeter. Liv sprinted across the open ground, rounds from pursuing enemy forces kicking up dirt at her heels. "Cutting it close, Sergeant," Miller shouted over the rotor noise, his good arm reaching down to haul her aboard. "Had to be thorough, sir," she replied, collapsing into a seat as the helicopter lifted off, banking sharply to avoid incoming fire. "Targets," Warren asked from the co-pilot's seat, his expression unreadable in the red glow of the cockpit lights. "5 for 5, Liv confirmed. "Mission complete." Warren nodded once the gesture containing more approval than words could convey. 3 days later, Liv stood in the command center at Firebase Liberty, where everything had begun. Colonel Harrison had assembled the key personnel who had witnessed her unauthorized intervention in the Korengal Valley. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation. "Attention," Harrison called, and the room snapped to order. "As you were." He stepped forward, his weathered face as unreadable as ever. 3 days ago, Sergeant Olivia Reeves completed a classified operation that eliminated 5 Tier 1 threats to coalition forces, he announced formally. This action, combined with her exceptional performance during Operation Valley Sweep, has resulted in a formal commendation. He turned to Liv, who stood at parade rest, her expression neutral despite the significance of the moment. "Sergeant Reeves has demonstrated the highest traditions of the Marine Corps Courage Initiative and unwavering commitment to mission accomplishment in the protection of her fellow Marines." Harrison's voice carried an undercurrent of genuine respect that hadn't been present before. Effective immediately, she is being reassigned to Special Operations Command for specialized deployment. Donovan, standing among the assembled Marines, caught her eye and offered a small, respectful nod. Miller grinned openly, his injured arm still in a sling. Old Bill stood at the back, his weathered face creased in a rare, proud smile. After the formal proceedings, Harrison approached her privately. "I still don't approve of disobeying direct orders, Sergeant," he said quietly, "but I cannot argue with the results. 412 Marines returned from that valley because of your actions. The remaining 68 owe you for making their deaths count for something." "Thank you, sir," Liv replied simply. "Don't thank me. Just don't make me regret supporting this transfer." He extended his hand. "Godspeed, Sergeant Reeves." Later, as she packed her few belongings, Warren appeared at her door. "Ready for your next chapter?" he asked. Liv considered the question carefully. "I have conditions," she said finally. Warren raised an eyebrow. "Such as, I remain a Marine, not just an asset. I operate with autonomy, but within a framework of accountability. And I want Old Bill as my handler, someone who will tell me when I'm crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed." Warren studied her for a long moment. "Those aren't standard protocols for the division." "Neither am I, why?" Liv replied simply. A slow smile spread across Warren's face. "No, you're certainly not." He extended his hand. "Welcome to the Shadows, Phantom 7. On your terms." As they shook hands, Liv felt the weight of her father's metal disc in her pocket. She had started this journey as dead weight, a quota-filling female in a male-dominated world. Now she stood as something else entirely, a Marine who had proven her worth not through words, but through decisive action when it mattered most. That evening, she found Old Bill at the range methodically cleaning a vintage rifle. "Heard you requested me as your handler," he said without looking up. "Brave choice. I'm not known for being gentle." "I don't need gentle," Liv replied. "I need honest." Bill nodded, setting aside his cleaning cloth. "Your father used to say something about snipers. We don't seek glory. We seek impact. The shot nobody sees coming, but everyone feels." Liv smiled, feeling a sense of completion she hadn't experienced since her father's death. "Sounds like him." "Sounds like you," Bill corrected, looking up to meet her eyes. "Welcome home, Phantom 7.